Yo, what's up, everyone? Today, I wanted to talk to you about a series formerly near and dear to my heart, Pokemon. In this in this gaming community, in the gaming scene, there really aren't a lot of series as recognizable as Pokemon. I mean, you can't really deny it. If you were to show your mom a picture of Pikachu or Charizard, you could bet your bottom dollar that she'd at least be able to tell you that's a Pokemon. It's recognizable. It is a cultural icon that's going to stand the test of time. It's really a juggernaut of gaming, and I don't think there's any way to deny all that. But despite all of that, despite it all, if you look through the YouTube community, if you look into the minds of a lot of the hardcore set, including myself, Pokemon has seen a fall from grace. Now, Pokemon to me is a series that in its earliest years, was marked by passion, by perseverance. This was a series that in its earliest days pushed the hardware to its limit. Pokemon Red and Blue, as I recall hearing, had only bytes of data left. Just tiny fractions of data that were unused. Pokemon Gold and Silver included 2 full world maps. It had Johto and Kanto, a feat so taxing that it almost couldn't be done on the Game Boy, but they pushed it. Something that difficult has never been attempted since. See, the new games, they aren't reflective of this same ambition. Modern Pokemon, it's not ambitious. It reflects cowardice. Here's what I mean. Play a Pokemon game made for 3DS and really pay attention to how many tools you're given to freely break the game's balance. How many powerful Pokemon you're given. Look at the EXP share. This is an item that provides an additional 50% experience to every Pokemon in your party. This would be a superfluous addition, if not for the fact that the difficulty curve is based on the EXP share being off. In essence, the player is given a significant advantage over the rest of the in-game trainers. An advantage that grows more pronounced as the game goes on. And there's no secret to this trick. Nothing that you need to do to prove yourself. It's just a massive reward for no effort on the player's part. But more than that, think about all the in-battle power-ups that the player now has access to in these new games. Think of X and Y version and their Mega Evolution system, or Sun and Moon with their Z moves. Without going into a lot of detail, these strategies basically offer the player an immense advantage, a genuine power-up with no drawback. And these provide the player an advantage in battle over the in-game trainers, which by and large, for the most part, are unable to ever use these strategies themselves. The player has a level of dominance in these games that all but trivializes the entire experience. Now, play those same 3DS Pokemon games, but this time, pay attention to how little freedom the player is offered. Pay attention to how often the games restrict or outright forbid players from going on an incorrect or unnecessary path. Think of Pokemon X and Y. This is a famous example. Where the player reaches a large city, Lumio City, okay? This is an area that's designed as an impressive center point for the entire game. A huge area that's supposed to fill the player with awe and wonder that such a thing could be possible in a Pokemon game. They get there, and the player isn't allowed to explore. They're not allowed. They're not able to enter any area that isn't necessary to further the story. Oh, but the game is certainly going to reiterate and reiterate where the player should be going, and if they try to take one step off that beaten path, they're forbidden. Exploration it's clearly a thing in gaming these days, and yet not in Pokemon. And it's no mystery as to why. You see, there's a famous interview with Pokemon's director. It goes by the name Junichi Masuda, okay? I'll link this interview in the description, but I'm sure you've heard it. He tells us that the Pokemon games have deliberately been made easier over the years, and not because of any feedback from players, but because nowadays, players have more options for how to spend their time. You know, he says, like, in the past, a player may have only had 1 or 2 games to play, so if you got a game, that's what you had. Nowadays, there's free phone games, there's YouTube, there's Netflix, there's all sorts of ways to spend a person's time, and so a player doesn't need to spend their time with whatever game they're given. Now, I do respect the man for understanding his competition, but I think he takes it too far. You see, this is what I mean when I say modern Pokemon is characterized not by ambition, but by cowardice. Game Freak is so terrified, so piss-scared that their product doesn't measure up. They are scared that if the player encounters any degree of adversity, any lost battle, any point where they forget where they might have to go, anything like that, then the player will choose to play another game. All these design decisions reflect this deep fear and a lack of confidence in their own game. And if the developers themselves aren't confident that their own product is worth playing, can we really tell them that they're wrong? I think it's a shame, because, look at, like, the Dark Souls games. Look at Zelda, Breath of the Wild, you know? It's clear. Adversity is not the enemy. Adversity is the fuel that drives interest and passion for a game. Now, Pokemon has never been difficult, don't get me wrong here, but as the games have stripped away whatever challenge was there, as they've stripped it away more and more, they've become less and less engaging. Pokemon's desperation to remain unadversive has, I think ironically, pushed the games to a point where those same phone games that they fear so much are indeed the more engaging ways to spend a person's time. Why would I spend my time playing Pokemon? Why would I go through the trouble? You know? Pokemon's basically going to play itself. It's not going to let me explore. It's not going to let me lose. It's not going to let me have a challenge. So what's the point? You know, and I say all this, and I know that there's a contingent of players out there that will say, yeah, that's true, but what you gotta look at is the PvP. You gotta look at the multiplayer. That's what Pokemon's all about. You know, the multiplayer. I'm a former Pokemon, competitive, I guess, kind of player. I mean, that was my first real online game that I took seriously, was Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. So I have a history with this series. I played it for a while. And I have to say, the multiplayer is a complete fucking dumpster fire. Pokemon multiplayer is only able to survive with the most modest diversity, right? Because of an ever-growing mountain of arbitrary house rules and bans, and even then it's an unbalanced mess with the same old threats popping up time and time again. It's completely centralized around a few strategies, a few Pokemon, and anything that gets too centralized will get banned later. It's the cycle of Pokemon, and I don't know. I don't like it. It's a competitive game where you can outpredict your opponent. You can make the right play and lose anyway, because the opponent got a critical hit, or, he used Thunderbolt and it paralyzed you. You send out a Pokemon, you make the right call, you know that this guy isn't going to use Energy Ball, you know he's going to use Thunderbolt, so you don't send in your fucking water type, you send in your rock type that's supposed to, withstand this shit, and you lose, because you got critical hitted. Oops. You weren't outplayed, you made the right call, but it didn't matter. This random element in Pokemon, it's pervasive and it's constant. It undermines the skill ceiling, and it's just not engaging. I kind of think of it like a game of chess, you know what I'm saying? It's a chess game, except sometimes the chess pieces move around without your input, and sometimes they ruin your strategy or ruin your opponent's strategy, you know? Whatever. And you get beyond that, and you still have the massive time investment problem. Here, let me explain this, okay? In order to explain how bad the time investment issue is, you need to understand two things, natures and IVs, okay? In Pokemon, natures are like a personality value that's assigned to each Pokemon whenever it's generated. Alright, when the game generates a Pokemon, it could be bold-natured or timid-natured or whatever. And the thing about natures is it will raise one stat by 10% and lower another stat by 10%. And there's no way to change a nature. So in a competitive environment, you have to have the correct nature, a nature that bolsters your most important strong point while holding back a mostly irrelevant stat. Let's say you have a Pokemon that's all about like physical attack. Well, you're going to want a nature that takes away the special attack, otherwise you have an inferior Pokemon. And that's the thing. 1 in every 25 Pokemon, only 1 in every 25 Pokemon is going to have the right nature. 24 out of 25 times, it's going to be inferior. Now then, IVs. IVs stand for individual values, okay? And these are also generated when the Pokemon comes into existence. When the game generates a Pokemon, it'll also generate a value between 0 and 31 and apply that value to each stat. So it's a different value for each stat. And essentially, this is just a pure boost. At their maximum level, that Pokemon will have an additional, 0 to 31 points for each stat. And if you don't have the perfect 31 in every relevant stat, again, your Pokemon's at a disadvantage. It's inferior. All this to say that the first step in making a Pokemon is just playing odds. It's this unengaging fight against the numbers, constantly forcing the game to regenerate the same Pokemon over and over and over, until eventually you get one that could be viable competitively. And so at that point, you train the Pokemon, and you use like special EV training methods, and you fight the same opponents over and over to make sure you get the perfect stats. It's this total numbers game, exploiting the way the game is made. I think it's pretty telling that in Game Freak's attempt to streamline the Pokemon experience, they've done very little to streamline the multiplayer. It's still as unengaging as ever. And what? All for what? For a Pokemon that you spent hours trying to generate just gets, banned or restricted down the road? Give me a break. I don't know. Like I said, Pokemon's an inconsistent multiplayer game anyway. It's a game that can and will fail to reward the better player because of its pervasive luck factor. But it's also this massive time investment gap that causes, hacking and unofficial battle simulators to be so pervasive in the Pokemon community. All in all, Pokemon's a series that's lost me. For the first time since the 90s, I don't know if I'm gonna buy the next game in the series. The next mainline entry, I might let it slide. 'Cause it's not the series I once loved. There's not a lot left for me to like in there, and I think that's a shame. Anyways, I just wanted to put that out there. That's my opinions on the Pokemon series.